Over the past several weeks on our location-independent business calls, we've spoken to dozens of single American and Canadian men making over six figures who are desperate to get out of the US and Canada. Their reason? Dating sucks in the West. They would much rather go to Southeast Asia, Latin America, or Eastern Europe to date or even to find a wife. And don't just take it from us. 3 days ago, CNA Insider, a Singapore-based media outlet, published a documentary on these so-called passport bros, and a recent Internations survey found that 68% or more of single Western men living abroad reported feeling happier and more fulfilled in their romantic relationships than they did at home. In this video, we're going to talk to you about what the F is going on here and give you all sides of the story.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat, your go-to channel for navigating location-independent living and building a business abroad. I'm Amanda and this is Justin, and we're both expats currently living in Mexico. If you're interested in figuring out how to leverage global opportunities for both love and work, then stick around and don't forget to book a location-independent business consultation. The link will be below this video for personal guidance.
And definitely like this video as well. Give it a thumbs up, and that helps us out a ton with our mission of reaching 1 million entrepreneur expats and aspiring expats. And subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell if you're interested in more content like this.
So before getting into what the F is going on in the West and why all these Western men want to go to other countries to find women, let's first give a little bit of context in terms of our relationship and our perspective, because I think we're actually in a little bit of a unique position to comment on this. And the reason being that we were both born and raised in the United States.
She's from Miami, which arguably is part
Capital
of Latin America.
America.
I'm from California, which arguably is maybe still by some considered part of Mexico. So, you know, we've got some Latin vibes at heart. But.
So we were both born and raised in the United States, born and raised in Western culture, Western school system, so on and so forth. However, our families come from the more traditional cultures that these passport bros are moving to. I am Latina, my family is from Cuba, and you are Eastern European.
Yep.
So we feel like we have an interesting perspective because we've lived in both worlds and we get it. And currently we are in Mexico, where we're actually seeing this stuff happen in real time. I was at the nail salon the other day, which inspired this video, as well as all the stuff coming out on social media again. And, you know, they were saying, you know, there's some girls there and they were on vacation in Cancun, Mexican women. And, you know, the American guys were very interested in them. And the American guys and the Canadian guys and the Spaniards are all hitting on the Latin women, telling them, hey, we don't want to date the women in the United States or Canada or even Spain. So all these Westerners are like looking for other alternatives. We are seeing it happen in real time. So what the hell's going on in the West? What is happening?
Well, there are a lot of things that are going on in today's day and age. One of the first things that we're going to talk about in terms of what's going on in the West and why passport bros exist in the first place is this phenomenon of cultural and political polarization. So, as I'm sure you know, watching this video, likely as somebody from the US or Canada or probably Western Europe, you're experiencing a lot of polarization in the culture today. You're seeing these two sides on total extreme opposites of the aisle getting farther and farther away. And when it comes to men and women specifically, the men, young men in the West are becoming much more conservative, and young women in the West are becoming much more liberal. And this isn't just our opinion. Pew Research actually did a study on this in 2021, and they found this to be the case. So that causes a lot of value mismatch between the two genders. And so it creates this big clash here. We actually have a client, Alicia, who's going to be on this channel very soon as well. And she's a top 1% marriage counselor in the US. She's got waiting lists to work with her at any given time. And she really knows her stuff. And she talks about this idea that there's just this fundamental lack of relationship education. And because people don't know how to act in relationships, combined with all of that crazy polarity that's being compounded
Polarization.
and that's happening in society right now. That leads to chaos both in dating and in long-term commitment. What else is happening, Amanda?
Well, I just want to add to that a little bit, like being Latina and then you being Eastern European. And I actually learned how to date from Asian women, which was an interesting experience that I can talk about later in this video if you're interested. I like the way Asian women date, they use their brains. But one thing I've noticed is that in these other cultures, that two of which we're very familiar with because we're from those cultures, that whole like butting heads thing doesn't happen as much. Like there's typical fights, like, oh, you left the toilet seat up, or oh, you left this where it wasn't supposed to be, or you spent too much, there's like typical stuff, but there isn't this full on war on the sexes that you see going on in Western countries. I can speak for Latin culture. There's a very heavy influence in Latin culture on family's number one, period, point blank, end of story. And everybody's just kind of in agreement with that. And there's also this fundamental understanding, at least in Latin America, I'm not sure about Eastern Europe, you'll have to speak on that one, that it takes a village to raise a kid, family's number one, all hands on deck, and that everybody has their roles in that. And I think part of what's going on in the West is all of that's getting very confused with a lot of extreme individualism. That's the vibe I'm kind of getting. I don't know about Eastern Europe.
I would say it's that, I think we're on the fifth wave of feminism. It's that kind of fifth or fourth wave feminism combined with, honestly, just a lot of societal contagion of these ideas that you're going to be happy if you do this and if you go totally against the value rules. And you can speak to this a little bit more because you're a woman, but there's certain aspects of feminism for sure in terms of giving women opportunities and having more access to things that they didn't have before. Obviously, being able to drive, being able to vote. But then I think that there's a certain period in history, and I can't pinpoint exactly where it is, but it's been in the last probably couple decades or so where it's really gotten bad. But it's not just, hey, we want to be at the same level as men. It's basically we hate men. We don't want to have anything to do with them. We don't need them. And we want to essentially take over a lot of those roles that men have. I'm curious what your perspective is on that as a woman. And as a Latina woman as well.
Yeah, well, on the Western side, you do get a lot of what you just said. It just is what it is, and the fight for equality. And I agree, first wave feminism was absolutely necessary. I wouldn't be on this video if it wasn't for first wave feminism. But I do think things kind of grow to an extreme. I did the whole independent woman, very successful business, I don't need no man thing. And I'm like, wow, this really just shoots you in the foot.
Why is that?
Because you're so hyper-focused on your career and making money that everything else suffers. And I think for the majority of women, that's not a good deal. And I think the other thing that happens is oftentimes a lot of those women, you have to do work on this. I worked on this. This is what I learned from the Asian women when I learned how to date from them. There's this idea, a lot of times there's a struggle when you have like these hyper independent, very career driven women, that they struggle a lot in relationships because they're two totally different skill sets, completely different skill sets. I think for a guy, it's a little bit easier because it's like you're masculine in the workplace and you're masculine at home. But for women, we have to do a bit more of the switching.
Task switching.
We have to do more of the task switching.
For sure.
And a lot of women don't know how to do that. Or the other thing that happens in the West is like, let's say you do want something more traditional. Well, then they look at you like you have snakes coming out of your head and that there must be something wrong with you. But this is what I liked about Asian women when I was learning from them on how to date, is that they're actually very practical. Like a lot of women think that Asian women are like super subservient and stuff like that. And yes, but I think there's just a better understanding of this is extremely practical, right? You want me to do these more traditional feminine tasks. Well, you're going to be doing the more traditional masculine tasks, and this is how this is going to go.
Yeah, do you want to go up on the roof and clean the water tank and check the gas pressure and clean the solar panels?
No, I'm also ambitious, but I don't necessarily want to lead a team of 20 people. Like it's exhausting. For me to do that. And like I said, been there, done that. The agreement that we have is that I would much rather have you do that. But I also think, number one, lesson learned the hard way. But number two, we come from more traditional cultures. So that's not seen as anti-feminist in any way. It's just kind of seen as common sense. And I think what's happened with feminism in the United States is that common sense went out the window.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, a lot of women are now shooting themselves in the foot because they are working, they're raising kids, they're with men who are not masculine at all, because let's face it, that is a huge problem in the United States. And to be fair, anything seen as masculine right now in the United States is demonized.
If you want to see a really good example, check out the TikTok video that's going viral where you have Western men talk about if they would go 50-50 with their women in relationships, and then you have Eastern European men,
Russian men
answer the same question.
Right. So the Western men was like, no, we're 50-50. She's a grown woman. She needs to take care of herself. There was obviously a lot of testosterone missing in a lot of those men. And you understand.
And Russian man says, what are you talking about? This is my wife. Of course I take care of her. She takes care of children. She takes care of house. She cooks borscht for us every week. What do you mean I'm not going to take care of my wife? Send her to work? Okay, if she wants to work, she can work. But she's my wife. It's my responsibility.
Yeah, and I think a lot of... it's weird because you have women in the United States who are completely fed up with the fact that the men in the United States have gotten more feminine. And I hear that's also happening a little bit in Western Europe.
Yeah, they're kind of partly the cause of it, too.
Yeah, it's like everybody's at fault here. Like, everybody has a role to play here, and everybody's at fault, and I think everybody's just confused. And I think in Latin American culture and Asian culture and Eastern European culture, there's just less confusion when it comes to those things. And people date in those cultures, at least definitely in Asia, people date based on values, not based on feelings.
Yeah.
You know, and for Western people, that's sometimes a very difficult thing to understand because that's not how dating's done in the West anymore.
No, here it's like you hook up with someone off Tinder and then they just kind of stay.
Here in Mexico, or
Not
like
in Mexico.
in the West?
Well, in the West. When I say here, I'm from America, so it's like you get on an app, whatever. You have different things like that. You know, you have your feelings, whatever, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're in a relationship or marrying this person, right?
The other thing that I find really interesting, especially between like the United States and, for example, Latin America, is that I feel like in Latin American culture, there's still like a polarity or an understanding of polarity between the sexes. And it's not to say Latin America doesn't have its problems, because it totally does in relationships. I mean, there's like worldwide crisis levels when it comes to relationships. But I'll give a really concrete example. In Latin America, if a guy is chivalrous, opens a door for you, carries something for you, maybe he'll call you mi amor, mi vida, whatever. It's like not a huge deal.
Their terms of endearment.
Yeah,
basically.
it's not a huge deal if a guy does that. But I know you've had experiences in the United States where it's like a massive deal.
I've had women actually get mad if I try to open a car door for them.
Western women.
Yeah, Western women. I haven't really dated many, as you can see why. But yeah, what Western women were like, they actually will get offended if you do something like that, like open a door, or hold the door open at a restaurant. You know, try to help them with something that's heavy. Like it's very odd. Actually, it's very, very odd. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
You're not the first Western man that I've heard that from. I've actually heard that quite a lot. And I always was confused as hell because I'm like, really? You want to work? Like, I hear that from the women. And I'm like, you want to work more? Like, he's willing to help you, like, so you don't have to work as hard, and you insist on working more? Like,
why do you think that is, though? Like, why?
I don't know, but that's how
like
they
that?
keep ending up with men who don't want to do jack shit. So that's part of it. So I think, you know, it's just there's like so much confusion going on in the United States when it comes to all of that perhaps, you know, in Latin America, it's not as big of an issue. Asia, they tend to date very logically in Asia. I learned a lot from Asian women when it comes to dating. And in Eastern Europe, it seems that they figured out, okay, how to have that equity, like you said. If I mean, you're like that with me. If you want to work, go work. But it's not like your responsibility, basically, to like provide for everybody in this household. And it feels like a lot of Western women are finding themselves in that position because there's just mass confusion going on. I don't know any other way of explaining it.
The same things that they're asking for, they're really upset when they actually get them.
Yeah.
Because it's not like, here's the other thing too. It's not just feminism per se. It's not the individual women in the West that are that are the issue. It's like the social virus, the social contagion of all these things that society is telling them that they should do,
Battle
they
of the
should want.
sexes.
This battle of the sexes. It has to be a clash all the time between women and men. So it's not the individual necessarily that's at fault here, but the fact that that society keeps things like this prevalent and going on, that is a big reason why all of these men, the so-called passport bros, are leaving and going to other countries. And if you look at the stats, I think we already said that 30% of US adults have tried the dating apps. Only 12% of those actually found meaningful connections.
The rest is basically just hookup culture,
Yep.
which of course is leading even more to the social insanity going on in the United States, because people aren't even getting into, healthy sexual relationships with each other, which is causing all sorts of other chaos in society.
And if you look at marriage rates and things like that, the success rate of the total rate of US marriages has dropped by nearly 60% since the 1970s. And you look at all these crazy, like double digit, over 50% in many states divorce rates as well. It's not looking good. And statistics show that 56% of singles are citing financial stability as their primary obstacle to settling down.
Which is fair, because the United States and Canada and Western Europe keep getting more stupid with the cost of living and the high taxes and economic policy. So people, and you're seeing that also in people not wanting to have kids. They're like, literally, what is the point? It cost me 50 grand just to give birth. Like, why would I do that? Plus, the culture's crazy. Why would I bring a kid into this? We hear that a lot on the location independent consultations as well. So let's talk a little bit about why some of these men are moving abroad. We've already talked about what some of the issues are based on our own experience, based on the data, and also based on what these men are telling us on these calls.
Yeah, because we talk to them all the time.
All the time, right? And also what we're seeing here in Mexico when Westerners and Latins date, right? And how that goes. And it seems to just work a little bit better in terms of a harmonious relationship, again, because there is that understanding in Latin culture of it being more traditional, so there's just less friction in that department. Okay, so let's talk about why some men look abroad, because before you and I got together, you were one of those men.
I mean, to an extent, yeah. I don't know if I would classify myself as a passport bro per se. I mean, there were a lot of other reasons that I wanted to live in other countries. I'd say that if anything, I was an entrepreneur expat first, and maybe a little bit of a passport bro second. It wasn't like 100% my primary motive. I remember one of the things that led me to living in Colombia after I had visited there for a couple of weeks was I was actually eating at a food truck in Austin, and I spent about $25 on two tacos from a food truck and a Gatorade. I'm like, I could just go to Colombia and like have much better food for a tenth of this price. This is ridiculous. So that was kind of my primary drive, and having like freedom and not being a part of the culture, including the dating culture. But I can't deny that women in Latin America were also a lot more appealing. And that's why somehow I've now gotten engaged to a Latina. So it kind of came full circle, even though she's from the US. We have kind of those cultural similarities between like my Eastern Europeanness and the Latin culture. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap. We'll have to go into that probably in another video. But in the East, in basically Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe and Latin America as well, there's a lot more emphasis on family-oriented dynamics. There's a lot more emphasis on traditional gender roles. There's a lot more emphasis on, honestly, even just things like beauty and attractiveness and the woman like taking care of herself and things like that frankly are just more appealing to Western men. Like a lot of these women in the West are just hating on Western men because they like the things that they like. And if you look at it from
you're just operating like men.
Well, exactly.
And then you get demonized.
If you look at it from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, what's happening in big part is that women are actually going against their evolutionary makeup and psychology and everything else in the West, versus they're going with the flow in other places like Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, South America, etc. And then men are just simply going with their instincts and with their native, essentially, programming, right? It's how we're built. It's how the things we've always been attracted to.
I would argue that there's one thing where Western women are still very hell-bent on keeping the evolutionary or biological way that they're wired, and that is, which I find very confusing, by the way. So I'm going to try and explain it, but I understand it's a little confusing. Where it's like they want a modern relationship, but they want the man to pay for everything. And it's
How does that work?
I'm not sure exactly how that works, because a man who would want to pay for everything is usually a lot more conservative and traditional in the way that he does things. And granted, there's nuances, and relationships are all a negotiation and stuff like that, and every relationship is unique. So we're grossly generalizing right now. But you see a lot of it where it's like he's got to be 6 feet and 6 figures. You see a lot of that
Which
stuff.
is a much smaller segment of the market than most women actually think.
Super small.
Yeah, there's a lot
Super small.
There's a lot of the what do you call it? Like the Red Pill podcasts that talk about this. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole,
if you want to go some weird
if you
rabbit
want to
holes,
go down like a deep rabbit hole,
don't take their dating advice. But
No,
man, it's a
no.
really interesting study on
Been there, done
what
that.
is going on.
have the stories to tell, but
Yeah.
not a good idea. Yeah. But it's interesting because the women will actually think, oh yeah, 60% of guys are making over 6 figures. I'm like, no, it's a lot less than that. So.
Now, that being said, I understand a woman's evolutionary need to feel like she's taken care of and safe and provided for, because women are the ones who have kids and have to take a back seat. And we're the ones who, like it or not, are more vulnerable in this society. So it just is what it is. And I feel like in the West, like they just like to fight that a lot. And in other cultures, they just don't fight it.
And it's not working well for them, like they say in Cuba. Se salió mal la jugada.
Yep, se salió mal la jugada. Yeah, that didn't work out too well in the end. So other things, and this is kind of what I was alluding to before, that in these other cultures, there's more of a prioritization on the teamwork and community dynamics and family dynamics, as opposed to the rugged individualism, I get to do whatever I want when I want kind of vibe that you would get in the West. So I could see why that I get to do what I want when I want. I don't need anybody. I could see why that taken to an extreme would cause issues in relationships.
And of course, back to the economic advantages, and this is a big part of what's fueling that passport bro phenomenon, which is the lower cost of living in a lot of these other countries actually allows men to comfortably provide, which makes the relationships more stable because there's not a bunch of like financial turmoil. That's the number one leading cause of either divorce or not getting married in the first place is financial issues. So when the cost of living is lower in those other countries, well, men can provide better. And because women want men that can provide in those countries, it just kind of works out. What do some people say though? Because we were watching that video there on that Insider. What was
the documentary?
The documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the CNA Insider. What were some of the opposing views and like some of your thoughts on that? Because again, I want to defer to you as a woman, because you can probably speak on this a little bit better even than I can.
Yeah, so one of the opposing views I actually found a little bit bizarre, and I'll explain why. So one of the opposing, and I think this is the one that made the least amount of sense in comparison to the other ones, is they said, oh, this passport bro thing is just colonialism, because they go to these countries with brown people and expect the brown people to be subservient to the white people. And I said, yeah, that argument completely just loses everything when you take into account that these men are also going to Eastern Europe and all those women are white. So
yeah,
I just or the Balkans,
Balkans area, or a lot of places, even Central Europe. Hungary, I mean, a lot of places where it's not just brown
Slavic
people,
women, Russian women. Mm-hmm. So all of them are white. So that argument just kind of doesn't really have much to stand on when you take that into consideration. I think, other things that they talked about was just, sexual exploitation, which I think we need to talk about the difference between sexual exploitation and actually being in a healthy relationship, because sex tourism is a thing. It exists. The mail order bride thing exists. And also there's the aspect that exists that women in these countries, I say this as a Latina, also know how to finesse these men if they are not very street smart. A lot of these women will see these Western men and be like, that's my ticket to the United States, although less and less of them want to go to the United States now. but they see it as, my way out of poverty, for example. And some of them, will finesse men. So there's that side of it. There's the side of it that can be very transactional and not actually that healthy, which they brought up, where they could be an exploitation of each other, basically. But I think that's different than what we're hearing on the calls, which is, I just want a better life for myself, and my values are more in alignment with what's going on in another country. I think the two are very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that there is a distinction there, right? Like, just because they're going to a country that is economically disadvantaged, where they have enough money to be in the upper earning bracket and therefore get the women that they want, doesn't mean that they're taking advantage of any situation. It's what people have done for history, throughout history, like either going to a place with a lower cost of living, going to a place where their dating prospects were better. Like, it's been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years since humans began, right? Like, we've traveled, we were nomads. None of this is new at all. In fact, if anything, the new part is that, you're born in one place and you just stay there forever. Like, that's a wild thing. That's only really existed in the last few hundred years.
Yeah, and I think part of the criticism that, for example, Western women have toward the passport bros is, well, you don't have money to afford me in the United States.
But
a lot
I
of
don't
the
know
guys,
if they actually want those women, even if they could afford that.
Well, there's that, but I think there's also, like, a lot of these guys that we talk to are making six figures, so they would fit the category, at least in the finance department, of what these women want, and they still don't want to date these women. They would still rather go to the Philippines or Colombia, or, well, not Ukraine right now, but you know what I mean.
They're still there.
Oh, really? Okay, you would still, they would still rather go to these places. But one of the criticisms, and this is just insulting, that a lot of the more Western women, at least the ones who go viral on social media, which of course is not a representation of all Western women, but for example, they just assume that women in, like, the Dominican Republic or Mexico or the Philippines or Thailand, or that they're like uneducated women, and
they don't speak any English.
They don't speak any English. They're uneducated.
They're from the favelas.
Yeah, and that's just not true at all. I mean, Mexico, for example, has one of the fastest growing middle and professional classes in the world right now. It's just categorically false.
I will argue the devil's advocate for that,
though,
because if you look at especially places like Colombia, where I've lived, there are definitely men that will go and just pretty much latch on to any woman that they can find on Tinder, or the easiest, and they're just trying to date a bunch of women or sleep with a bunch of women there. And yeah, they might attract a lot of the women that are from a much lower income bracket. I've seen that for sure. But on average, like, if they're looking to get into a relationship,
like a serious
right, they're probably going to find a woman that's similar intelligence, similar interests, similar values, similar background. Just because they're from another country doesn't mean that they're not going to speak your language at all. And even if they don't speak your language, they can still be educated, and maybe you find a language that you have in common, or you learn Spanish or whatever. Like, it's not that difficult. But to Amanda's point, these women are not, like, all from the hood in another country. Not they can't read and write. Like, it's just such a ridiculous thing.
Like, it's just crazy to even think that. Especially Eastern European women are extremely educated.
Europeans in general, especially in Eastern Europe, are people there are extremely educated. They typically speak 2, 3, 4 languages. They're well traveled. They know a lot. I mean, I've dated both in South America and Eastern Europe, and what people say about, oh, you're just, dating these dumb women, like, it's just complete BS. It's made up, and it's also, I think, they're in many cases, like, either they just don't know, like, the women that are saying that are about those other women
they
are
look
ignorant.
like the uneducated dumbasses when they say that.
Either they don't know and they're ignorant, or they're just trying to spread false stuff like that, so that
the men don't leave.
They're basically trying to, like, guilt trip those men, or trying to get them not to leave, because that's a bad deal for them. It's just very weird. It's like a very weird, chaotic thing.
The whole thing is bizarre. I'm really glad we're getting married.
I'm really glad. I'm really glad I'm not in the dating pool anymore, especially not in the US.
Yeah, so. It's all very, very bizarre. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about personal perspectives on all of this. We've mentioned it a little bit as we're talking about this, but we could go a little bit deeper. I've talked about a lot of the differences between like what I've noticed, right, between Latin culture and Western culture, or even the Spaniards. Because, like I said, I'm at the nail salon and the Spaniards are all hitting on them too. And they're like, we don't want these European women. We want the Latinas. Like all the European women and the American women, they all lost their damn minds, right? We want more feminine women. And that's why they're going to all these places. And then I mean, I've even heard stories at the salon where it's like, oh yeah, my Mexican friend went to vacation in Vallarta and she met a Canadian guy and now they're engaged. Like it happens like this, like really fast. I think because there's more polarity.
There's more polarity, and if you've been, what was that analogy that they used? I forget whose YouTube video it was, but or a comment somewhere where they're like, if you have to, yeah, the dating scene in the West is basically shit. Why would I have to wade through all this shit just to find the gold when I can go somewhere where there's a lot more gold and a lot less shit? That's basically the analogy.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of men were saying. It was a comment, I think, that was under the documentary, where it's like, look, he was Asian American.
We'll see if we can find that one.
Yeah, he was Asian American, and he's saying, I've dated both in the West and in Asia. And in the West, you just have to wade through more shit to find the gold. So if you can just change your location and not have to wade through shit, why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly. Like if you like the beach, what are you doing living in Arizona?
It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's just really interesting because I think part of what's happened in the West and with Western women is that there is this misunderstanding, and even with men, right? Like there's a total misunderstanding of like masculine and feminine energy, or masculine and feminine, I guess, embodiment, for lack of a better term, or traits or qualities. And when they do talk about it, it's like very simplistic. It's not nuanced at all.
It's single dimensional.
It's very single dimensional when they talk about it, which I think causes a lot of the confusion. And I will say that one of the things that I learned, in Latin culture, I got the whole family comes first thing since like birth, and that more traditional piece. But in terms of like the skills, and flirting and polarity and all that is very easy in Latin culture, but a lot of the skills in terms of like the practicality of it all, I actually learned from Asian women. And I was very interested by the way that Asian women would date. And I think that the West can learn a lot from all these cultures in terms of dating, but the Asian women are super practical, right? It's like, do we have shared values? Do we have shared goals? I think they're just good negotiators.
Sounds like it.
Too.
They've been reading a lot of Chris Voss.
Maybe. Right? They're just good negotiators too, where there's this understanding of like, these are the traditional roles. This is what creates polarity in a relationship, and we're going to negotiate what that looks like. But it's, and also all these cultures, all three of them have a more community oriented reality about the way that they live. So
versus that rugged individual feminism of the West.
Yeah. And I think what's happened in the West is people just aren't using their fucking brains anymore when it comes to dating. It's all feelings or hormones. And it's not even like, I'll give you an example. Because there's a dating coach that I'm friends with on Facebook, and she will oftentimes talk about these things. Like I've had clients that I've talked to this week that don't know anything about their partner's finances. They don't know anything about their views on marriage or kids or anything. I'm not talking about people who just met. I'm talking about people who've been together 5 years. And I looked at them like, there's no way in hell a Latina or an Eastern European woman or an Asian woman wouldn't have gotten all that information up front. Otherwise, what would have been the point of continuing to date? There would have been no point. Yeah. And I think in the West, that's missing.
100%. And it's very similar because I had Eastern European roots, growing up. I mean, that's where a big part of my family is from. And there it's very different. Like obviously even there it's evolving a little bit, but typically in Eastern Europe, the woman stays home, she takes care of the kids, she cooks, she cleans. And it's not just the act of doing the things. She's kind of holding the space for the man to be able to come back from work, feel relaxed, feel happy, feel taken care of.
Because he's at war all day.
Because he's basically at war all day. Maybe a bad analogy now.
Oh,
you get the point,
sorry.
Right? So,
oops.
So the idea is that the woman is not just cleaning and everything and cooking, but actually maintaining the household. And she's in charge of that thing versus oh, okay, let's go 50-50. Let's both go to work. God knows who's going to take care of the kids. Now they're going to have that dual income, but now they're going to have to pay 20% of it just to have a babysitter look after their kids. And then their kids are going to get raised by somebody that's not them.
Which is interesting.
Like, what are you doing?
We were
right?
hanging
it
out.
goes against a lot of our values.
We were hanging out with some Mexican friends yesterday, and they're like, I'm not having strangers raise my kids. There's no way in hell, right? So there's like an understanding of that. That doesn't mean they don't have help in the house, right? It's just that help is either very close to the family already, like they've been there for a while, or it is family. But this idea of like sticking their kid in a daycare is like, absolutely not. We're not doing it.
Yeah, because who knows what they're going to be teaching in that daycare or wherever they're going. So I think it's really important that kids do have a dual parent household whenever possible, and also.
Oh God, we didn't even get into the statistics of single households in the United States being at record highs right now. We didn't even get into that. But it's in breakdown basically in the West and in other countries where it's more traditional. It's not that they don't have their problems, they do, right? You can get into that very transactional dynamic very easily if you're coming from a wounded place rather than wanting to have a healthy relationship, but they seem to have less issues in that department. And it seems that Western men are quite attracted to that because they're like, these women in these cultures, let me be men, essentially.
Exactly. The long story short here is that things are getting really difficult and really ugly in the West. In fact, they have been for a while, and they're just getting worse and worse. And more men every single day are deciding to take their chances abroad because of all of the cultural and relationship and value differences that we've talked about today. Now, if you're a man in the West, especially a single man, and you're looking for love abroad because you realize, hey, this is not the sandbox that you want to play in, and you don't have a location independent business, or maybe you have a remote job, but they're probably not going to let you work from anywhere like Mexico or South America or anywhere else. In fact, most remote jobs today do not let you work from outside of your home country, believe it or not. Over 95% of remote jobs don't let you leave the country and work. So what is the solution? The solution is starting your own location independent business, and Amanda and I can help you do just that.
We've both been digital entrepreneurs for 15 years each. So we have a wealth of knowledge that we can share with you guys. And plus, we actually just do it and we live it. So you can get the information on how to book one of those calls below. Just FYI, we are going to be traveling a lot in January because we have Christmas, we have our wedding, and we have our honeymoon. So
we're going on the Icon of the Seas.
We are, and I'm pretty excited. We'll take you guys along for the ride. All of that to say, the spaces are going to be extra limited in the new year. So make sure to get your spot now for those extra limited spaces until we're able to open up our calendar again when we're back in Mexico.
Like and subscribe, book that call below, and we're going to see you very soon on the next one.